March 2nd, 1998, 9:45 at night. 19-year-old Suzanne Lyle steps off a city bus at SUNY Albany less than a minute from her dorm room. She never makes it home. The next afternoon, her ATM card is used once exactly $20 withdrawn with a PIN known to only 2 people. Her boyfriend is never ruled out. Her mother spends years searching the Mohawk River, guided by a feeling she cannot explain. A careful honors student who called her parents every day vanishes from a university campus and leaves behind one transaction that changes everything. Tell me, where are you watching from? The morning started with stress. Suzanne had a midterm exam in computer science, and she'd told her Babbage's manager in late February that worry consumed her. She needed to excel on this exam, not merely pass. When she sat down that morning in a classroom on North Campus, we can only imagine whether her hands shook as she picked up her pencil. She attended other classes after the exam, following her schedule until 4 o'clock. Then she left for Crossgates Mall, 2 miles west, clocking in at Babbage's. Her manager would later remember asking about the exam. Suzanne said she'd done okay and seemed somewhat subdued, though not upset. Perhaps exhaustion had settled in. Perhaps something else weighed on her mind. From 4 until 9 that evening, she worked a probably quiet Monday shift helping customers and organizing merchandise. Nothing unusual happened. She was professional, pleasant, present. At 9 o'clock sharp, the store closed. Suzanne said goodbye to coworkers, walked through the mall to the bus stop, and boarded the Capital District Transportation Authority bus that would carry her back to campus. The driver who regularly worked this route would later confirm with certainty that he saw her board around 9:20. She'd taken this bus dozens of times before. She likely found a seat and settled in for the short ride, perhaps looking out at dark streets passing by, perhaps thinking about the exam or planning to call Richard when she reached her dorm. The ride took about 25 minutes. Around 9:45, the bus pulled up to Collins Circle. This was Suzanne's destination, the stop closest to Colonial Quad where she lived. A friend and classmate was also on the bus. This friend would later tell police she saw Suzanne exit at Collins Circle. But the bus driver's account differed. While certain Suzanne had boarded, he wasn't certain he'd seen her get off at this particular stop. What he could say, absolutely, was that she wasn't on the bus when he reached the end of the route downtown. Somewhere between Collins Circle and downtown Albany, Suzanne Lyle left that bus. Whether she got off where she was supposed to has haunted investigators for 27 years. Let's assume the friend's account holds truth. Suzanne stepped off the bus into the parking lot at 9:45 on a cold March evening. Her dormitory waited just 200 feet away, less than a minute at normal pace. She had no reason for fear. This was her campus, a path she'd walked countless times after evening shifts, late study sessions, dinners with friends. The parking lot was lit. Other students were likely around. She simply needed to walk from the bus stop to her dorm, climb the stairs, unlock her door, and step into safety. Her suite mates were there. They would have heard her arrive. They always did. Suzanne's keys and various fobs jingled distinctively when she walked, one of those small identifying sounds that becomes part of someone's presence. They never heard those keys jingle that night. Suzanne had a routine after Babbage's shifts. She would call or email Richard Condon, her boyfriend, who attended a different Albany area college. They'd been together since high school. They talked daily, sometimes multiple times. He'd set up her computer for remote access, a technological connection that would seem invasive now, but perhaps felt normal to 2 computer enthusiasts in the late 90s. That night, Richard waited for Suzanne's call. It never came. He tried calling her dorm room. No answer. He waited, tried again, still nothing. At what point did worry set in? After an hour, too. Or did he tell himself she was tired, she'd gone straight to bed, she'd call in the morning? By morning, denial became impossible. The next day, March 3rd, Richard called Doug and Mary Lyle at their Ballston spa home. Suzanne hadn't returned to her dorm. She was missing. She hadn't answered calls or sent emails. This wasn't like her. Something was wrong. The Lyles immediately called campus police to report their daughter missing. The response would haunt them for years. Brief absences were not uncommon for college students, they were told. Their daughter would likely turn up soon. No need to worry. But the Lyles knew their daughter, and they worried. Campus police sent an officer to check Suzanne's next scheduled class. She wasn't there. Her suite mates confirmed she hadn't returned to their room that night because they would have heard her keys. Then the Lyles made another call to Suzanne's bank, and what they learned made their blood run cold. Suzanne's debit card had been used that afternoon at 4 o'clock to withdraw $20 from an ATM at a Stewart Shop's convenience store in Albany. Someone had used her card. Someone who knew her PIN, because without the correct PIN the transaction wouldn't have processed. By the time campus police finally agreed that Suzanne's disappearance wasn't typical, 2 days had passed. 2 critical days. 48 hours during which trails grow cold, memories fade, evidence disappears. March 5th arrived before campus police finally called in the New York State Police for assistance. That 2-day delay would become a point of bitter criticism from Doug Lyle. During those 2 days, Suzanne missed not just 1 but 2 midterm exams, didn't call home, didn't show up for work, didn't contact anyone. The family knew something terrible had happened, while authorities assured them everything was probably fine. The Lyles and SUNY Albany immediately posted a $15,000 reward. Flyers with Suzanne's picture covered campus and surrounding areas. But by then, Suzanne had been missing for more than 72 hours. When someone vanishes, there's a critical window where they might still be found alive, might still be nearby, might still leave traces. Every hour matters. Every minute counts. By the time investigators really began their work, those critical hours had stretched into an eternity, and whatever trail might have existed had already gone cold. The New York State Police brought resources campus police couldn't match. In the first 2 weeks, they pursued 270 leads. They searched 300 acres near Collins Circle, walking through wooded areas, the parking lot, every possible place a young woman might have been taken or fled. They searched Rensselaer Lake, in the Albany Pine Bush, a nature preserve sitting just across Interstate 90 from that campus section. They found nothing. No sign of struggle, no torn clothing, no drops of blood, no indication that anything violent had occurred at or near that bus stop. Suzanne had simply evaporated into the March night. But that ATM withdrawal demanded attention. $20 withdrawn at 4 o'clock on March 3rd at Stewart Shops on Central Avenue and Manning Boulevard, about 2 miles southeast of campus. This wasn't an area Suzanne frequented, according to her parents. The clerk working didn't recognize her from photos, so if Suzanne hadn't made the withdrawal herself, who had? Stewart's had a security camera, which sparked hope until they learned it monitored the cashier area, not the ATM. No footage existed of who had used Suzanne's card. They did have a description of a man wearing a Nike baseball cap near the ATM around that time. Finding him became priority. When they finally located and questioned him, investigators came to believe he had nothing to do with Suzanne's disappearance. They couldn't completely exclude him, but he didn't seem connected. Which circled back to the question with no good answer. Who knew Suzanne's PIN? According to Richard Condon, only 2 people possessed that knowledge: Suzanne and himself. The bank provided additional information that deepened the mystery. Records showed Suzanne's card had been used for 2 other withdrawals on March 2nd, the day she disappeared. One in the morning at a machine near Collins Circle, another in the afternoon at Crossgates Mall, around the time she would have arrived for work. Both were for exactly $20. This seemed normal initially. Suzanne always withdrew exactly $20 at ATMs, according to her parents. She was methodical about money. $20 was her standard amount. But Mary Lyle couldn't understand why her daughter would make 2 withdrawals in one day. If she needed $40, wouldn't she just withdraw 40 at once? Suzanne was practical. She understood how things worked. Making 2 separate withdrawals didn't make sense. Unless she'd needed $20 for something specific in the morning, then found herself needing more later. She'd told her mother just the day before that she was low on cash. Had she been more desperately short than she'd admitted? These questions spiral without answers. Small mysteries within the larger mystery. The bus driver was certain Suzanne had boarded at Crossgates Mall. He recognized her as a regular passenger. But when asked if he'd seen her exit at Collins Circle, uncertainty crept in. What he knew absolutely was that she wasn't on the bus when he reached downtown. The friend and classmate said she saw Suzanne get off at Collins Circle around 9:45. This seemed to confirm what everyone assumed, that Suzanne had made it back to campus and vanished somewhere in that 200-foot walk. But the driver's uncertainty introduced doubt. If he didn't actually see her disembark at Collins Circle, could she have stayed on the bus, gone downtown for some reason? Some investigators theorized she might not have even gotten on the bus at all, though the driver's confirmation that he'd seen her board contradicted this. Her suitemates were certain about what they didn't hear. Those jingling keys. Suzanne had not made it back to her room. A co-worker from Babbage's provided a troubling detail. About a month before she disappeared, Suzanne had mentioned believing someone was following her. She thought she was being stalked. But according to the co-worker, Suzanne hadn't seemed particularly afraid, more aware than frightened. Who was this potential stalker? Had Suzanne reported it to anyone else? Did this person exist? Or was it misunderstanding, a moment of paranoia meaning nothing? The clerk at Stewart's shops didn't recognize Suzanne from photographs. This suggested she might not have been the one to make that 4 o'clock withdrawal. But not recognizing someone isn't the same as confirming they weren't there. Stewart's was busy. The clerk couldn't be expected to remember every customer. These fragments, some contradictory, some incomplete, were all investigators had. Then there was the boyfriend. Richard Condon was several years older than Suzanne, a fellow student at a different Albany area college. They'd been together since high school, bonded by shared love of computers. He'd helped set up her system. He could access it remotely. He knew her ATM PIN, and he had an alibi. On the night Suzanne disappeared, Richard had been home playing video games with a friend. The friend confirmed this when asked. The timeline seemed solid. While Suzanne was stepping off that bus at Collins Circle or downtown or wherever she actually went, Richard was in front of a screen controller in hand, accounted for. But alibi or not, Richard Condon's behavior after Suzanne disappeared raised questions that have never been answered. He told police Suzanne was his fiancée. This came as news to Doug and Mary Lyle. Their daughter called them almost daily. She told them about classes, exams, her job, her concerns. She would have mentioned an engagement. She would have shared that joy. Wouldn't she? Mary Lyle would later reveal to CBS News something troubling about the relationship. Suzanne had tried to end things with Richard on several occasions. Each time, Richard would become emotional, and Suzanne would relent. She would stay. Why? Was it compassion, guilt, fear of hurting him? Or was there something else, some form of pressure keeping her locked in a relationship she'd tried multiple times to escape? 2 weeks before Suzanne disappeared, Mary and her daughter had been visiting Mary's mother. Suzanne asked if they could stop at Richard's house along the way. She said she wanted to give him a Valentine's Day card. They stopped. Suzanne went inside briefly. Nothing unusual happened as far as Mary could see. But years later, Mary would wonder whether that was really a Valentine's card or a different kind of letter. A goodbye letter ending the relationship. Had Suzanne finally worked up courage to break things off, doing it in writing because she couldn't bear to see his emotional reaction again? Police found no evidence that Suzanne had been involved with anyone else. But Mary had begun to wonder in those weeks before the disappearance if her daughter's stress wasn't just about exams. Could there have been someone else? Could Richard have found out? These are questions built on speculation, on a mother's intuition, on the terrible mathematics you do when trying to understand why your daughter vanished. After his initial conversations with police, Richard Condon refused to take a polygraph test. He said he would only be interviewed again if his lawyer was present. Then he stopped talking entirely. He refused to answer questions from media. When reporters tried to reach him in later years, he declined comment. His mother told CBS in 2010 that Richard had married and moved on with his life. Moved on. As if Suzanne's disappearance was something that could be left in the past, like an old job. To be clear, having a lawyer isn't evidence of guilt. Refusing a polygraph isn't evidence of guilt. Declining to speak to media isn't evidence of guilt. These are rights anyone can and should exercise. But in the minds of those who loved Suzanne, these refusals meant something. They meant questions that would never be answered. They meant a person of interest who could not be ruled out but also could not be charged. As of 2023, police still won't publicly disclose who has or hasn't been ruled out. But everyone who follows this case knows Richard Condon has never been cleared. Investigators looked at other possibilities. A convicted rapist who had violated parole left the Albany area right when Suzanne disappeared. This coincidence seemed significant. Police tracked him to Illinois, interviewed him, and came to believe he wasn't involved. But came to believe isn't the same as definitive proof. In 2005, 7 years after Suzanne vanished, a man named John Regan was arrested after attempting to abduct a female student in Saratoga Springs, the town where Suzanne had grown up. He'd pulled up in a van and tried to grab the young woman off the street near her high school. Regan had been convicted of a kidnapping in Connecticut back in '93. Now here he was attempting the same crime in Suzanne's hometown. Police and the Lyle family immediately wondered if he'd been responsible for Suzanne's disappearance. But even after Regan was convicted of the Saratoga Springs attempt, he refused to discuss the Lyle case with investigators. Refused, not denied involvement, just refused to discuss it at all. What does that silence mean? Is it guilt? A power play? Simply a criminal exercising his right to say nothing? We don't know. We may never know. In May of 1998, 2 months after Suzanne disappeared, a groundskeeper found something in the parking lot near Collins Circle. Suzanne's name tag from Babbage's, lying on pavement about 90 feet from the bus stop in the opposite direction from her dormitory. How long had it been there? No way to determine. The name tag could have fallen that very night, or been dropped weeks earlier, lying unnoticed until spring thaw made it visible. Police tried to recover forensic evidence from it, but weather, time, and foot traffic had destroyed anything usable. Still, the location was strange. If Suzanne had walked from the bus stop toward her dorm, the name tag would have been found along that route. Instead, it was found in the opposite direction, 90 feet away. Had someone grabbed her at the bus stop and dragged or forced her toward a vehicle parked that direction? Had she dropped it struggling, or had it simply fallen off earlier, meaning nothing, explaining nothing, a name tag on the ground? That's all they had. Our community knows the particular fear that grips a college town when one of its students vanishes. Parents who send children to university do so with sacred trust that campus will be safe space for learning and growth. When that trust shatters, when a young woman can disappear in 200 feet between a bus stop and dorm room, every parent feels it. And when campus police dismiss a missing student as just another college kid blowing off steam, every family wonders whether they'd do the same to mine, whether my child's disappearance would be taken seriously, or whether I'd Fassix. I have to fight for 2 days just to get someone to start looking. The Lyles fought. They pushed. They refused to accept empty reassurances. But those 2 days vanished along with their daughter. Whatever evidence might have existed, whatever trail might have been followed, those 48 hours were gone. As March turned to April, intensive searches stopped. Volunteers went home. Cameras moved to other stories. The 270 leads had been pursued to dead ends. The 300 acres had been walked and searched and walked again. Suzanne was gone and no one knew where. But in the Lyle home in Ballston Spa, Doug and Mary made a decision. If they couldn't find their daughter, they would make sure no other family endured what they were enduring. They had no idea their fight would change federal law, or that 27 years later they still wouldn't have answers. The first year, after someone you love disappears, is special torment. There's no body to bury, no funeral to attend, no grave to visit. There's only absence and the terrible mathematics of hope versus reality. Every phone call could be the one that changes everything. Every knock might bring news. Every time you see someone with reddish blonde hair in a crowd, your heart stops before you realize it's not her, could never be her. Doug and Mary Lyle lived in this space between grief and hope, unable to mourn because she might still be alive, unable to celebrate her memory because she might still need saving. But within that first year, they made a choice that would define the rest of their lives. They would take their unbearable loss and transform it into something that mattered. They learned about a California couple whose daughter, Kristen Smart, had gone missing from a college campus in '96. That family had successfully lobbied for changes in California law requirements that colleges have proper protocols for investigating serious crimes and missing persons on campus. If it worked in California, why not New York? The Lyles reached out to state legislators. They told Suzanne's story repeatedly. They explained. The 2-day delay described confusion about jurisdiction between campus police and state police, detailed the lack of protocols, the absence of clear chains of command, the assumption that missing college students were probably just being irresponsible kids. The legislators listened. A bill was drafted formally called the Campus Safety Act, but referred to by everyone as Suzanne's Law. It required colleges and universities in New York State to have detailed written plans for investigating violent felonies and missing persons cases occurring on campus. It required prompt reporting to the state. It mandated coordination between campus police and local law enforcement. No more 2-day delays. No more they'll probably turn up. No more confusion about who was responsible for investigating what. On April 6, 1999, Suzanne's 21st birthday, a birthday she never got to celebrate. Governor George Pataki signed the law. Doug and Mary stood beside him as he put pen to paper. Their daughter was still missing. They still had no answers. But now other parents might get answers faster. Other students might be found in time. It was something. When you have nothing, something is everything. But the Lyles weren't finished. New York state law was a start, but what about the rest of the country? What about federal databases and national protocols? At the time, local police departments were only required to report missing persons to the National Crime Information Center if they were under 18. Once you turned 18, you were legally an adult, and if you wanted to disappear, that was your right. Never mind that 18-year-olds are still in high school, that 19-year-olds are still sophomores in college, that the brain doesn't fully develop until the mid-20s. The Lyles wanted that changed. They wanted the age raised from 17 to 21, covering all college-age young adults. They lobbied, wrote letters, told Suzanne's story to anyone who would listen, traveled to Washington, refused to give up. In 2003, President George W. Bush signed into law the PROTECT Act, an omnibus bill designed to protect children. Buried in that legislation was another Suzanne's law, the federal version that raised the mandatory reporting age to 21. Now, when a 19-year-old like Suzanne went missing, local police had to report it to the National Crime Information Center. The case would go into federal databases. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children could be notified. Resources like age progression technology and professional flyer design became available. 2 laws, 2 victories, and Suzanne was still missing. That same year, Doug and Mary attended a conference for families of missing persons. They listened to other parents tell stories mirroring their own. The same anguish, questions, terrible waiting. One woman's speech particularly struck them. Afterward, when they spoke to her, she said something that changed their trajectory. I could have laid in bed with a cover over my head for years, but I decided to really get out there and talk about this. The Lyles looked at each other and made a decision. Mary began speaking publicly about her experience, not just to legislators, but to anyone who would listen. She told Suzanne's story at conferences, colleges, law enforcement training sessions. She became a voice for families who had none. Together, Doug and Mary founded the Center for Hope, an organization dedicated to supporting families of missing persons. They provided resources that hadn't existed when Suzanne disappeared. They educated law enforcement about new laws and increased responsibilities. They created networks of support so no family had to navigate this nightmare alone. The Lyles helped other families find their loved ones. They helped other parents get answers. They made sure other missing persons cases didn't get dismissed or delayed. They did for others what no one had been able to do for them. In 2005, John Regan's arrest brought a spike of terrible hope. Could this be the answer? Could this man who'd tried to abduct a young woman in Saratoga Springs be responsible for Suzanne's disappearance? But Regan wouldn't talk about it. Even after his conviction for attempted kidnapping, even when faced with possibility of additional charges if he'd been involved in Suzanne's case, he remained silent. That silence could mean anything or nothing. And so the Lyles were left where they'd always been, waiting for answers that might never come. In 2008, the Lyles achieved another legislative victory. The federal Suzanne Lyle Campus Safety Act was signed into law as part of the Higher Education Opportunity Act. This law took provisions from the '99 New York state law and applied them nationwide. Every college and university in the country now had to have clear protocols for investigating violent crimes and missing persons on campus. Jurisdiction between campus police, local police, and state police had to be clearly defined. The confusion and delays that had plagued Suzanne's case those critical first 2 days would not happen to someone else's child. 3 laws. 3 times Suzanne's name had been written into legislation. 3 times her disappearance had changed how America protected its college students. And still the Lyles didn't know where their daughter was. Over the years, 75 psychics contacted Doug and Mary with tips about Suzanne. Many mentioned water, a lake, a river, a pond, somewhere wet, somewhere deep, somewhere Suzanne's body had been submerged and hidden. Mary dismissed most of these tips. The Capital District is riddled with bodies of water. Saying she's in water was so vague as to be meaningless. You could spend lifetimes searching every body of water in the region and never find anything. But there was one place that haunted Mary in a way she couldn't explain. The Crescent Bridge carries U.S. Route 9 over the Mohawk River between Albany and Ballston Spa. Mary crossed it regularly, driving between her home and the places where Suzanne had lived and worked. And every single time she crossed that bridge, she felt something. She described it to reporters as an odd feeling, not quite a vision, not quite certainty, just something, a pull, an awareness, an intuition that beneath that water answers waited. Was it a mother's instinct, or was it the power of suggestion? After so many psychics had mentioned water, there was only one way to find out. In June of 2016, 18 years after Suzanne disappeared, Mary Lyle crossed the Crescent Bridge with a reporter from the Schenectady Daily Gazette and a team from a local firm that specialized in high-tech underwater mapping. They deployed their equipment into the Mohawk River, scanning the bottom with technology that could detect shapes, objects, anomalies hidden in murky depths. The newspaper never reported what, if anything, they found, which likely means they found nothing. If human remains had been discovered, if Suzanne's body had finally been located after 18 years, that would have been news. The silence after that search told its own story. The river kept its secrets if it had any to keep. Mary's odd feeling remained unexplained. She still crosses that bridge. She still feels it. Our community knows that sometimes the only way to survive unbearable loss is to ensure no one else suffers the same fate. The Lyles could have collapsed into their grief. They could have spent decades frozen in March of 1998, unable to move forward because they couldn't let go. Instead, they built a ladder for other families to climb out of the same dark hole. 3 laws bearing their daughter's name. Thousands of missing young adults now protected by protocols that didn't exist before Suzanne disappeared. Hundreds of families receiving support from the Center for Hope. It's not the ending they wanted, but it's the legacy Suzanne left behind. And still, every night Mary went to bed not knowing where her daughter was. Every morning she woke to the same terrible unknowing. In 2015, 17 years after Suzanne vanished, Doug Lyle passed away. He had spent nearly 2 decades searching, advocating, refusing to give up hope. He had transformed his grief into laws that protected thousands. He had been there for the first Suzanne's Law, the second, the third, but he never got the answer he'd searched for. He never learned what happened to his youngest child. Mary was alone now in her search, alone with her questions, alone with that odd feeling every time she crossed the Crescent Bridge. The Center for Hope continued. The activism continued. The annual remembrances on March 2nd and April 6th continued. But Doug was gone, and Suzanne was still missing. Our community knows the particular torture of not knowing. When someone passes away, as terrible as that grief is, there's finality to it. A body to bury, a funeral to attend, a grave to visit on birthdays and anniversaries, rituals that help the living say goodbye. But Mary Lyle has no grave, just a feeling every time she crosses a bridge. Just a daughter who exists in that terrible limbo between hope and grief. Just a river that might hold secrets or might hold nothing at all. In 2018, 20 years after Suzanne disappeared, a New York State Police senior investigator named John Camp made a public statement putting words to what most people had long suspected. "We believe it's a homicide," he said. "Is there a chance she moved away? It's a possibility, but the reality is she's probably been a victim of a homicide. Probably. Not certainly. Not definitively. Probably." Even the police, after 2 decades, couldn't give the Lyles a definitive answer. They believed Suzanne was gone in the most permanent way possible. But belief isn't proof. Belief isn't evidence. Belief isn't a body. And so the case remained open, technically active, realistically cold. In 2023, a New York State Police spokesperson confirmed that the investigation into Lyle's disappearance is ongoing and remains categorized as a missing persons case. They noted that multiple interviews have been conducted but would not disclose who has or has not been ruled out as people of interest in this investigation. After 25 years, that was all they could say. There is no dramatic third act in Suzanne Lyle's story. No detective bursting through a door with revelation. No witness coming forward after decades of guilt. No deathbed confession. No forensic breakthrough. Just questions. Just theories. Just the terrible arithmetic of what we know versus what we don't. Suzanne boarded the CDTA bus at Crossgates Mall around 9:20 on the evening of March 2, 98. The bus driver confirmed this. She was a regular passenger. He recognized her. A friend and classmate says she saw Suzanne exit the bus at Collins Circle around 9:45. This stop was less than 200 feet from Suzanne's dormitory. Suzanne never made it to her room that night. Her suitemates were certain because they would have heard her keys and fobs jingling. That sound was as much part of Suzanne as her reddish-blonde hair or her love of Rush. The next afternoon, March 3rd, around 4 o'clock, someone used Suzanne's debit card to withdraw $20 from an ATM at Stewart's Shops on Central Avenue. That person knew her correct PIN. Without the correct PIN, the withdrawal could not have occurred. Richard Condon, Suzanne's boyfriend, told police that only two people knew that PIN: himself and Suzanne. Richard had an alibi for the night of March 2nd. He was at home playing video games with a friend. The friend confirmed this when questioned. After initial conversations with investigators, Richard refused to take a polygraph test. He said he would only speak to police again if his lawyer was present. He never did speak to them again. He has never spoken publicly about Suzanne's disappearance. In May of '98, Suzanne's Babbage's name tag was found in the parking lot near the Collins Circle bus stop, approximately 90 feet from the stop itself, in the opposite direction from her dormitory. No forensic evidence was recovered from it. No body has ever been found. The case remains open but unsolved. As of 2025, what we don't know may never be known. Did Suzanne actually exit the bus at Collins Circle? The bus driver was uncertain about this, though a friend says she saw it happen. If Suzanne stayed on the bus past that stop, where did she go? And why? Who withdrew that $20 from Stewart's Shops on March 3rd? If it wasn't Suzanne, it was someone who knew her PIN. Richard had an alibi, but alibis can be constructed. Friends can lie. Timestamps can be wrong. Why was Suzanne's name tag found 90 feet from the bus stop in the opposite direction from where she should have been walking? Did she drop it earlier during a previous shift? Was it torn from her clothing during a struggle? Did someone plant it there to confuse investigators? What happened on those 200 feet between the bus stop and the dormitory entrance? If someone took Suzanne, where did they take her? A car must have been involved. You can't force someone to walk with you on a busy college campus without being seen. But no one reported seeing anyone being forced into a vehicle. No one heard screams. No one noticed a struggle. How does someone vanish that completely? Richard Condon was Suzanne's boyfriend, her high school sweetheart. They'd been together for years, bonded by love of computers and technology. He'd helped set up her system. He could access her computer remotely, a fact that feels deeply invasive now, but may have seemed normal to two tech-savvy young people in the late 90s. He knew her ATM PIN. He knew her routines. He knew when she worked, when she took the bus, when she usually called or emailed him. He knew everything about her life. And according to Mary Lyle, Suzanne had tried multiple times to end the relationship. Each time Richard would become emotional. Each time Suzanne would stay. Was this love or manipulation? Was it compassion or fear? We can't know what was in Suzanne's heart when she made those decisions, but we know she kept trying to leave, and we know she kept coming back. 2 weeks before Suzanne disappeared, she and her mother stopped at Richard's house so Suzanne could give him a Valentine's Day card. That's what she told her mother. Years later, Mary would wonder whether it was really a Valentine's card or a goodbye letter. A final attempt to end things delivered in writing because Suzanne couldn't bear to see Richard's emotional reaction in person. We have no evidence either way. It's speculation, a mother trying to make sense of her daughter's final weeks by reading meaning into every interaction. But what if it's true? What if Suzanne finally did what she'd tried to do multiple times before? What if she ended the relationship for good? What might a rejected person do if they felt they were losing control over someone they considered theirs? Richard told police that Suzanne was his fiancée. Doug and Mary had no knowledge of any engagement, and Suzanne called or emailed them almost daily. She would have shared news like that, wouldn't she? Unless Richard was lying about the engagement, trying to establish a narrative where he and Suzanne were more committed than they actually were. Unless he was rewriting their relationship in his own mind. Or unless Suzanne had said yes to an engagement, but hadn't told her parents yet because she was planning to break it off, because she wasn't ready to make it real. These questions spiral endlessly, each one opening onto another. Richard had an alibi. He was playing video games with a friend. The friend confirmed this. But what time exactly was Richard with this friend? When did the gaming session start and end? The bus driver reported. Suzanne boarded the bus around 9:20. She would have arrived at Collins Circle around 9:45. If Richard left his friend's house at, say, 9:30, could he have made it to campus by 9:45? Could he have been waiting for her at that bus stop? Police presumably checked these timelines. They must have, but they've never publicly disclosed the details. All we know is Richard had an alibi, but he was never ruled out. After his initial cooperation, Richard refused a polygraph and hired a lawyer. This is his right. No one is obligated to submit to a polygraph test. No one is obligated to talk to police without representation. These are constitutional protections that exist for good reason. Innocent people hire lawyers. Innocent people refuse polygraphs. These actions prove nothing. But in a case where evidence is scarce and answers are non-existent, every refusal feels significant. Every silence becomes weighted with possibility. What would Richard say if he agreed to speak? What questions would he answer or deflect? What story would he tell about Suzanne, about their relationship, about that night? We'll likely never know. According to his mother, he married and moved on with his life. Moved on, as if Suzanne's disappearance was a chapter that could be closed. In 2023, when asked about the status of the investigation, New York State Police would not disclose who has or has not been ruled out as a person of interest. That careful phrasing tells us something. If Richard had been definitively excluded, if evidence had emerged, proving beyond any doubt that he couldn't have been involved, police would likely say so. They've excluded other suspects over the years. But Richard exists in the same liminal space where Suzanne exists. Neither confirmed nor denied, neither proven nor disproven. A person of interest who won't talk, a case that won't close. There are other theories. Suzanne told a coworker about a month before she disappeared that she thought someone was stalking her. Who was this person? The coworker said. Suzanne didn't seem particularly afraid, which might mean the stalking wasn't threatening in an obvious way, or it might mean Suzanne was minimizing something that frightened her. Did she report this stalker to anyone else? Did she tell Richard, her parents' campus police? If this stalker existed, could they have been waiting for Suzanne that night? Could they have grabbed her in those 200 feet between the bus and to her dorm? But if a stranger abducted Suzanne, how did they know her ATM PIN? How did they withdraw money the next day, unless they forced her to reveal it? But then why only $20? Why not empty the account? The stalker theory raises as many questions as it answers. John Regan's arrest in 2005 seemed like it might be significant. A man who'd been convicted of kidnapping in Connecticut in '93. A man who attempted to abduct a young woman in Saratoga Springs, Suzanne's hometown area, in 2005. Could he have been in Albany in '98? Could Suzanne have been one of his victims? But Regan refused to discuss the Lyle case. Not denied involvement, refused to discuss. Even when faced with the possibility that talking might affect his sentence or treatment in the criminal justice system, he said nothing. Is that guilt? Or is it a criminal exercising his right to silence about something he had nothing to do with? Investigators looked into Regan. They must have checked his whereabouts in March of '98. If they'd found evidence connecting him to Suzanne's disappearance, they would have pursued it. The fact that nothing came of this angle suggests there was nothing there to find. Then there's the theory that Suzanne never got off the bus at Collins Circle at all. The bus driver was uncertain about seeing her exit there. A friend says she saw it happen, but people make mistakes. Memories are fallible. In dim light at night, could the friend have been wrong? If Suzanne stayed on the bus, she would have gone downtown. Why would she do that? To meet someone, to go somewhere. But her suite mates knew she hadn't returned. Her boyfriend knew she hadn't called. What would she have been doing downtown when she was expected back at her dorm? Some investigators even theorized she might not have gotten on the bus at all. But the bus driver confirmed he'd seen her board. That piece at least seems solid. Unless he was mistaken too, unless everyone's memories are faulty, unless the entire night is built on a foundation of uncertainty. The name tag haunts this case. Found in May, 2 months after Suzanne disappeared, lying in the parking lot 90 feet from the bus stop, in the opposite direction from her dorm. If she dropped it walking from the bus to her room, it would be found along that path or beyond it. Instead, it was found the other way, as if she'd walked or been taken in the wrong direction. Was there a vehicle parked in that area? Did someone grab her at the bus stop and force or drag her toward a car? Did she drop the name tag in the struggle, or had she lost it days or weeks earlier during some other trip through that parking? A lot, and it meant nothing at all. Investigators couldn't recover any forensic evidence from it. Whatever secrets it might have held had been destroyed by time and weather, and the constant traffic of students crossing that pavement. Our community knows that sometimes the truth doesn't emerge. Sometimes technology doesn't save the day. Sometimes the detective doesn't have that eureka moment. Sometimes a young woman walks 200 feet and vanishes, and 27 years later, all we have are questions. The hardest truth about missing persons cases is that not all of them get solved. Some people just disappear, and their families are left to live in the terrible space between hope and grief, never able to fully mourn, never able to fully let go. Cases like this can break open at any time. Evidence doesn't have an expiration date. Guilt doesn't fade with age. Someone out there knows what happened to Suzanne Lyle, and people who carry secrets sometimes reach a point where they can't carry them anymore. A deathbed confession could come. Maybe Richard Condon. Maybe someone else involved. Maybe someone who helped hide evidence, or who was told what happened and has lived with that knowledge for decades. People facing the end sometimes decide they don't want to meet it, carrying lies. New technology solves cold cases regularly. Genealogical DNA analysis has cracked dozens in recent years. If Suzanne's body is ever found, if any biological evidence exists from the night she disappeared, modern forensic techniques might be able to identify her abductor in ways that weren't possible in '98. Someone could come forward. Maybe a friend who kept a secret because they were afraid. Maybe someone who saw something that night but didn't think it was important. Maybe someone who dated Richard Condon after Suzanne and heard him say something that didn't make sense at the time but makes terrible sense now. Richard could finally talk. What if he agreed to speak without his lawyer after 27 years? What if he decided to answer the questions he's refused to address? Would his story exonerate him or condemn him? A new tip could come in about a burial site, property that belonged to someone connected to the case, a location identified through new information. Cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar could search areas that haven't been checked before. Advanced underwater search technology continues to improve. The 2016 search of the Mohawk River used high-tech mapping. But what if a more thorough search with newer equipment could find what Mary's intuition has always told her is there? The case isn't over until it's solved. Until then, every one of these possibilities remains on the table. Mary Lyle is in her 70s now. She has spent more than half her adult life searching for her daughter. She still runs the Center for Hope, still advocates for families of missing persons, still speaks publicly about Suzanne's case. When reporters contact her for updates or anniversary pieces, she still gives interviews. She hasn't given up. She refuses to give up. But she's doing it alone now. Every March 2nd, Mary marks another anniversary of the disappearance. Every April 6th, Suzanne's birthday, she marks another year of age her daughter never reached. Suzanne would have turned 47 in 2025. She should have been a woman in the prime of her life, not a 19-year-old frozen forever in a '98 photograph. And every time Mary crosses the Crescent Bridge over the Mohawk River, she still feels that odd pull. That sense that answers lie beneath the water's surface. She can't explain it. She can't prove it. But she can't shake it either. The 3 laws bearing Suzanne's name are her living memorial evidence that her short life mattered. The '99 New York State Campus Safety Act requires colleges in the state to have detailed protocols for investigating violent crimes and missing persons on campus. Because of this law, when a student goes missing from a New York college, there's no more 2-day delay while campus police decide whether to take it seriously. The 2003 federal Suzanne's Law raised the age for mandatory reporting to the National Crime Information Center from 17 to 21. Because of this law, thousands of college-age young adults are tracked in federal databases when they disappear. Their cases get resources they wouldn't have gotten before. The 2008 federal Suzanne Lyle Campus Safety Act extended the New York State provisions nationwide. Every college and university in America now has clear protocols about jurisdiction, about coordination between different police agencies, about how to handle missing students. These laws have saved lives. They've reunited families. They've turned desperate 48-hour waits into immediate action. Other parents get answers Mary never got. Other students come home because campus police acted immediately, instead of waiting to see if the kid would turn up on their own. Suzanne's disappearance changed how America protects its college students. Her name is spoken in police academies and campus security training sessions. Her case is taught as an example of what can go wrong and what should be done differently. It's a legacy greater than one life. But it's not the legacy Mary wanted. She wanted her daughter home. She wanted answers. She wanted to know what happened in those 200 feet. Instead, she got laws. Thousands of people protected. Hundreds of families helped. It's something, but it's not enough. Richard Condon married according to his mother's 2010 statement. His location is unknown. He has never spoken publicly about Suzanne. He has never answered the questions that followed him for years. He exists somewhere, living a life that moved on from March 2nd, 98, while Mary Lyle remains frozen in that moment. SUNY Albany implemented better protocols after Suzanne's disappearance. The campus police department shares information with state police as it becomes available. The 2-day delay that occurred with Suzanne's case wouldn't happen now. Mary Lyle may never know what happened to Suzanne, but she made sure Suzanne's disappearance mattered. She made sure it changed things. She made sure other families didn't endure the same delays, the same dismissals, the same agonizing wait, while trails went cold. That's not the ending anyone wants, but it's the one she built from unbearable loss. This is where most true crime stories would end, with a trial, a sentence, a grave to visit. But Suzanne Lyle's story doesn't end. It continues every time a college student is reported missing and campus police act immediately instead of waiting 2 days. It continues every time Mary crosses that bridge and feels that odd pull. It continues every time someone reads this story and wonders whether they could be the one who finally knows something, because someone does know. In a case like this, someone always knows. Is it Richard Condon carrying a secret for nearly 3 decades? Is it someone else who saw something that night and chose silence? Is it someone who helped dispose of evidence, who knows where Suzanne is but has never told someone holds the answer to what happened in those 200 feet, between a bus stop and a dormitory entrance? Someone knows why Suzanne Lyle never made it home. And maybe 27 years later, they're ready to tell the truth. If you know anything about what happened to Suzanne Lyle on March 2nd, 1998, the New York State Police are still listening. The case is still open. The investigation is still active. Your information, even after all these years, could be the piece that finally solves this puzzle. Suzanne Lyle stepped off a bus and vanished. But her name, her legacy remains. It protects thousands. It changes systems. It reminds us that even in unsolved cases, even in stories without endings, purpose can emerge from loss. 200 feet should never be the distance between a daughter and home. 200 feet should never contain a mystery that lasts 27 years. But until someone speaks, until the truth emerges, that's exactly what it remains. A short walk that became an infinite distance. An ordinary night that became an eternal question. A young woman who deserved to come home and a mother who has never stopped searching for her.